Hello guys, welcome to history class, second round. One of the things Oliver said he liked about these online lectures, you could pause me, which is great because I've been told many times that I go a little bit too fast in class. So please make liberal use of the space bar on your computers when you're watching these videos. Today we're going to be talking about, we talked about the foundations of Western civilization. Today we're going to be talking about law and political organization. We're going to further make the distinction between the civilized world of the Romans and the barbarian world of the Franks. Because remember, this is a tribal world. This is a world of tribes, a tribal world that had contact with the civilized world. And this is civilization. And we're going to contrast those two ideas. And the first one we're going to do is not law, but political organization, all right? So that's the first one. So we'll call this the Roman side. We'll take the Roman side over here. What was the Roman idea of a state? This is the Roman idea of a state. And it's basically true, by the way, guys, it is the modern idea of a state. It is the modern idea of a state as well. What did that look like, okay? So basically, the first point. A sovereign authority exists. Someone's in charge, okay? A sovereign authority exists. All right? And that, you could say, is true of the tribal societies, but here's where the difference comes in, okay? This sovereign authority upholds the public welfare. You remember Trajan's letters with Pliny, where he was dealing with all of these, the fire company and the building of the old age center and the theater that was collapsing in, all of these mundane things, but they all concerned with the upholding of the public welfare. That life was, you had a standard of what a civilized world looked like. So you're upholding the public welfare, all right? So that is the second one. Now, how did you uphold the public welfare? Well, you collected heavy taxes. Taxes, guys, is a sign of civilization. I hate to tell you, you collected heavy taxes. And how did that work? Right? Is this in the way? I don't know what it is. You collected heavy taxes, all right? And what do you use these heavy taxes for? You use the heavy taxes for a standing army. Defense, standing army, public works, just like we do, public works, and to support an extensive civil service, all right? People who would go out and collect these taxes and administer this great empire, okay? So you have these things, sovereign authority, but their job is to uphold the public welfare. There's a sovereign authority here, but it's not necessarily concerned too much with holding the public welfare because it's a tribal society. They live by custom. They don't live by in the ordered legal way that these guys lived, okay? What did these guys do? They collected heavy taxes. That's really not true in the tribal world. And what did they support? Standing army, public works, civil service. That's the Roman idea of a state. Now, the fifth point here is the citizen was meant to feel loyalty to the state, and most Romans did. Citizens feel a loyalty to the state, which is very different than the kinship bond you have in the tribal world. A loyalty to the state, what we might call patriotism. But that's really not what is going on in the tribal world. Now let's look at the tribal world. The tough thing here, guys, on this side of the board and the Frankish idea of a state, the most I can tell you is that the Frankish idea, none of that stuff on that list really exists apart from the sovereign authority, okay? There is no upholding of the public welfare. There's just living according to custom. There's no collection of heavy taxes. If a king was weak, his nobles felt no loyalty to him. They pretty much acted on their own, okay? There really wasn't a standing army. You had your group of fellow tribesmen who were loyal to you. You were a warrior band, but it wasn't a standing army in the sense that Rome had it or we have it. No public works and no civil service, really, okay? So what did they have in the Frankish idea? Well, they had an absolute monarch. Okay? That was the sovereign authority. The king, Clovis, was an absolute monarch. Now, the difficult thing for the Franks, guys, though, is this rule that they had that every son of a king was a king. Every son of a king was a king. All right? And therefore, that kingdom, rather than maintaining a structure as Rome did for centuries, that kingdom here was broken up. The more sons the king had, the more kings there were. Eventually, the Frankish kingdom is going to be known as the Frankish kingdoms because of all of these realities. Now, you might remember when you read the story of Clovis, that he was named consul. He was named consul, all right? But that was just a title. It didn't mean anything. There was no Roman idea there, okay? And he did have people who worked with him in court, but they weren't paid officials like they were in the Roman world, okay? They might have titles that were Roman titles, but that's only because they wanted to live up to that standard. They wanted to live up to that standard, but they really didn't. They were just titles. They were just positions. It made them feel good. To have the honor of Roman titles made them feel good. Now, there was one unique office, if you want to call it that, in the kingdom of the Franks. And this is going to become a very important layer. And that office is called the mayor of the palace. The mayor of the palace. Sometimes from the Latin, from the major domo. The major of the household, the leader of the household. And that's exactly what he was, the major domo, domus, house in Latin, right? The mayor of the palace, he took care of the king's estates. He wasn't really an official in the same way that the Roman officials were, but the king had estates all over the kingdom, and he needed somebody to manage them. Plus, if there was anybody who wanted to be part of the king's court, you had to go through the major domo. So that was the unique office of the Frankish kingdom, but nothing like what we see in the Roman idea of a state. Now, we're going to move on to law. Now, law is a totally different situation, all right? Again, the difference is crazy. When you look at the law on the Roman side, the Roman idea of law, all right, you see some basic philosophical principles, okay? What are those principles, all right? Laws are based on reason and justice. Are based on reason and justice. And philosophically founded on universal principles. These are things that can be universally decided on, founded on universal principles. All right? And they really believed that you could, and we believe too, just like the Romans did, that you could enact these principles in legislation. The principles could be written in legislation or laws. All right? So that was the Roman idea of laws. Now again, you look at that. Over here, on the Frankish side, none of this exists. There were no universal principles. You were basically born into the law, all right? Because law was custom-based. So again, here, we have a lot of negatives. No universal principles. No idea of justice or reason goes behind their laws. They're not written. Legislation is written. These are unwritten laws. These are customary laws. You didn't know, no one brought up a law to you and said, oh, we're going to cite this particular law. They were all custom. They were all oral traditions, unwritten. We have the corpus juris civilis. We know what Roman law was. We know a little bit about what oral traditions were because, again, under the influence of Rome, they thought it would be a good idea to write down some of these oral traditions. But when you read them, unlike our laws, they sound very silly, you know. So if you smash someone's head and thou openest his head to a great extent that he loses this much blood, then the fine will be this much. But if you just put a small scratch on his head, then the fine will be this much. There was no idea of, well, the principle of assault is here, and like we're assaulting someone, so there'd be a penalty commensurate with assault. No, it was actually how much damage the wound actually caused that could cause the fine. So there are no universal principles. So what did they base their laws on? Okay, the custom. How did they determine guilt or innocence? And I talked a little bit about you the last time we were together. All right? They had some very interesting ideas about those oral traditions. One of the first ones was called the Wergeld. Some of you might remember this from 7th grade history, okay? The Wergeld, which was the price placed on a man's life. All right? So if you were a slave, you equaled the value of a horse. And then if you were a peasant, you had a weak value as well. Peasants. But if you were part of the royal court, you were protected by a triple Wergeld. A royal court, you paid triple what a normal noble person would made. You were protected by a triple Wergeld. All right? So basically, you could... What was the purpose of the Wergeld? Well, that's an interesting question. Why did they do it by fines? Well, the idea was this. You had to buy off the sword. Because I talked to you about how in the Roman society it was citizen-based. In the barbarian society, and we talked about this in our previous lecture, it was kinship. So in this law, if you committed a crime, you were personally held responsible for it. It was personal responsibility. Okay? In this law, okay, it was the kinship responsibility. The kin was held responsible. So, if I killed your brother, then you might not come after to kill me. You might not think, oh, I'm going to go kill him. He's the one responsible for that, that's my brother. No, you might kill my brother or my sister. You might take revenge on anybody in the family because all of my relatives, the kin, were held responsible for those actions. Again, there's no principle of personal responsibility in the Frankish law. And if you wanted to avoid that, then you paid the Wergeld. If you wanted to avoid someone coming in and killing your family, you say, okay, look, put that sword down, don't kill my sister. Here's some money, I'll pay you for killing your brother. And that was what the Wergeld was for. There was another custom, all right? Another custom, that was the Wergeld. So make sure you get that one down, the Wergeld. The next one was called compurgation. Compurgation. And this one, you swore an oath, formula. It was a formula, it wasn't just saying I'm not guilty. You had to swear an oath formula. And the idea was this. If you stumbled over the oath, if you trembled while you talked and you didn't say the oath clearly, if you stumbled over the oath, you were guilty. That was a sign of God's disfavor. And you were held guilty for that particular crime, all right? Now, if you were rich, if you were one of the high people up in that society, if you were a bishop or a king or a nobleman, you could swear the oath yourself. You could step up there, and if you got through the oath formula and you didn't stumble over the oath, you were found innocent. You didn't need any witnesses. You didn't need anybody around you. You were of high enough standing that your swearing of the oath was enough for you. But suppose you weren't in that class. Suppose you weren't in the upper class. Suppose you were a peasant who was accused of a crime. Okay? A peasant could not swear an oath on his own. Peasant needs helpers called compurgators. Compurgators. Basically, oath helpers. Now, you better pick some very articulate friends. You better pick some friends who know how to speak. Because if any of your oath helpers stumble over the oath, you're guilty. Because they said your friends couldn't do the oath for you. God showed disfavor by your stumbling over the oath. See, notice, there's no evidence involved in this. There's no evidence, there's no collection of evidence, there's no defense, there's no prosecution. You just swear the oath. And if you stumble, you're guilty, even if you weren't guilty. If one of your friends stumbled, you were held guilty. And then the last of them, I talked again a little bit about you with class, but now you're going to have them in your notes in more detail. The last of the great customs of the Franks were the ordeals. Ah, what fun ordeals were, right? And they have great names, the ordeals. These were to prove guilt or innocence. My personal favorite, as I described to you, is the ordeal of hot iron. All right, the ordeal of hot iron. You were accused of a crime, and you say, I want to go through the ordeal. I'll prove my innocence through the ordeal. And so, okay, and the ordeal was truly an ordeal. It was not fun. So in the ordeal of hot iron, they would take a red hot poker, they would stick it into a flame until it was red burning hot. They would bless you, they would bless the flames, they would bless the water. They would hand you the red hot iron, and you would walk 9 paces holding the red hot iron. You would drop it, and then you hold your hand out, and they would wrap your hand up, and after 3 days they would examine your hand, and if your hand was healing cleanly, you were considered innocent, and if your hand were infected, you were guilty. That is the ordeal of hot iron. Again, there are no principles here. There is no principle here at all, okay? This is the ordeal of hot iron. The other ones were similar. And we talked about this one. You guys didn't quite get this, was the ordeal of cold water, where they would tie you up, bound you, they would bless a pool of blessed water, they would throw you in it, and if you sank to the bottom of the water, that meant the water accepted you, and you were innocent. They would fish you out before you drowned. But if the water rejected you and you floated up, that meant that you were guilty. The ordeal of cold water. Ordeal, I'm sorry, not the order, the ordeal of cold water. All right? There was a similar one to the ordeal of hot iron, the ordeal of hot water. Okay, where there were stones in a boiling vat, and you pulled a stone out of a boiling vat of water, walked 9 paces, they bandaged your hands, same as the ordeal of hot iron. There's one that lasted until the 19th century. In fact, one of our vice presidents, I believe, of the United States died in one of these. Aaron Burr was vice president of the United States, and he killed Alexander Hamilton. I can't remember which it was. It was somewhere along that line. And this is called the ordeal of battle. The ordeal of battle, where someone made an accusation against you. Now, we might call it, in the modern days, what happened with Alexander Hamilton is a duel. It was a duel. So you wanted to prove your innocence? He said, that guy accused me. I want that guy and me to fight, and we'll fight to the death. And whoever wins was the one who was telling the truth. And that is how the ordeal of battle goes. We call a duel, where they would level the guns at each other. And it was all to protect your honor. But again, please understand, this is why we're saying this is a tribal world. This is not a civilized world. There are no principles involved in the makings of these laws. And that, guys, is the distinction between law and political organization, between the Franks and the Romans. So, review these notes, make sure you take them, review them, study them. We'll combine them with the foundations of the of the Western civilization, and we will do probably a test or something along those lines. Please keep working on your paper. Please, the time you've got, because you've all got plenty of time at home, work on that research paper. Make sure it's going along very well. You can always email my wife or I about that if you have any questions. So thank you.